Great. So welcome, welcome everybody, and thank you for being here. It's too bad that we still have for this second year in a row to be online. Hopefully next year we will be able to meet in person. And to open this new edition of the International Workshop on Confluence, we are very glad to have Jesper Cox, who is going to be speaking about the quest for Confluence. So I guess this is about checking confluence of rewriting rules automatically in Agda and related systems. Thank you very much, Jesper.
Yeah, thanks for the introduction, and yeah, thanks for inviting me. So I'm really glad to be here. Well, since I'm not, or I wouldn't really consider myself to be a member of the community around Confluence, let me maybe start by introducing myself a bit. So I'm a researcher working mainly on the theory and implementation of dependently typed languages, in particular the Agda language, which you might have heard of, or if you haven't heard of that, well, there's another language called Coq, which is quite similar. Up until about 2 years ago, I knew basically nothing about Confluence. Well, I knew the definition and the basic node bendix, but nothing much more than that. But since then, I've been working a lot on implementing and designing a Confluence check for rewrite rules in the Agda system. So after that, I still feel that I don't know a lot about Confluence checking, but I'm eager to learn more. So please, if you have any questions or remarks during this talk, I would be very glad if you interrupted me with those. Okay. There's also a good point to mention my collaborators on this. I'm not working on this alone, but with Theo Winterhalter and Nicolas Tabarot. So they are both working on this Coq system that I mentioned. And so basically I had been working on rewrite rules in Agda for a while already, and they were interested in adding a similar feature to Coq, which isn't there yet, but well, we started collaborating, and in particular, this Confluence check is something that we designed together. So I mostly worked on the implementation side. Theo did a lot on the formalization side. So everything of this is actually also formalized in Coq. Right. So yeah, what am I talking about today, actually? So I'm me quickly give you the highlights of this talk. So we'll be talking about a version of dependent type theory that we call rewriting type theory, which is dependent type theory extended with user definable rewrite rules. And I'll talk a bit about why that is something you would want to have. And then yeah, I'll also talk about this Confluence criterion that we designed and implemented, and which has two important properties, namely that it's modular and it's decidable. And it's based on a certain, quite well-known property called the triangle property of parallel reduction. And then, yeah, so the other two parts are, so there's the implementation of rewriting type theory, or as an extension to the Agda system. So you can now add rewrite rules to Agda yourself, and the Confluence check will check Confluence. And there's also a formal proof of these important properties, such as Confluence and subject reduction in the as an extension to the Metacoq system. So I won't be talking too much about that because that's mainly what Theo worked on, but I'll try to give you the big picture of that as well. Okay. Yeah, and I should also mention, well, this is quite far from being the first work on extending, or the first attempt at extending dependent type theory with rewrite rules. There's a quite long legacy, and as far as I can determine, the first ones who came up with this idea was Manera et al. From 1997, and then there were further people who worked on this, extending this idea to either more powerful type theories or more powerful notions of rewrite rules. In particular, Frédéric Blanqui had this calculus of algebraic constructions in 2005. Then, well, Next to that, there is another line of work, or related work, which is the extensions of the Coq proof assistant with rewrite rules. In particular, this system called Coq-MT and later Coq-MTU, which extends Coq with a decidable first order theory and also uses rewrite rules for that. Yeah, and unfortunately, as far as I know, there's no up-to-date version of this. So, but it's very interesting work. And finally, I should also mention the deducti system, which is actively developed version of the Martin-Löf's logical framework extended with rewrite rules. And so that has been going on for a while as well. And recently there was some interesting work on Confluence checking for that as well. So from 2009. Okay. So then, what is the real new thing that we have? Well, we have first of all, we have the implementation of a concrete instance of this type theory with rewrite rules, and we have this concrete way of checking Confluence. So those are the two main things that I want to talk about. So let me give you an overview of the rest of this talk. The chromatic arc. So first, I'll start by introducing type theory with rewrite rules, which will, as I'll tell you, will solve a lot of problems and will be great and everything will be awesome. Then we'll look a bit at the meta theory of this system, and we'll see that, well, actually adding rewrite rules breaks a lot of properties that we usually expect from dependent type theory. And everything will be going sour, everything will be awful. But in the third part, we'll resolve this conflict by adding a Confluence check, which will at least restore some of the good properties that we expect from a dependently typed system. And everything will be kind of okay again, and we'll have a system that hopefully is more usable than we had before we added rewrite rules. Okay. So that's the overview of the talk. So I'll start with the first part, which is the type theory with rewrite rules, type theory unchained. Okay. So let me start by talking a bit about dependent type theory in general. So many modern proof assistants are based on this dependent type theory, which was introduced by Tait-Martin-Löf back in the 70s. These proof assistants can be quite complex systems, but at the core, this dependent type theory is quite a simple language. So at the core, it's really just a lambda calculus with a very fancy type system added to it. So in particular, one of the most important features where it gets the name from is this dependent function space. So which is a type of functions where the type of the output depends on the value of the input. So for example, we can express a function that takes a Boolean as an input, and then depending on whether the Boolean is true or false, returns a natural number or a Boolean. Right. And then another important feature of this dependent type is that we have universes. So these are types whose elements are themselves types. So for example, this type of Booleans belongs to the type, and type itself belongs to a new type called type 1, which belongs to type 2, etc., etc. And then finally, there's a lot of other features that can be added, such as identity type, inductive type, such as Boolean and natural numbers, and other things as well. But this is the image of dependent type theory that I want you to keep in mind. Okay. Right. And so when we define dependent types, such as Martin-Löf's type theory, we can extend that in a very modular fashion by for each type former basically giving 4 sets of rules. So first of all, for example, if you want to introduce the natural numbers, we can first define the formation rule, which is just saying that natural numbers are a type. Next, we give the introduction rules, which say that we have 2 ways of constructing a natural number. Either it's 0 or it's the successor of another number. Then next we have the elimination rule, which is also known as the induction principle, which says, well, if we want to prove a property P for any natural number n, then it's sufficient to prove that this property P holds for 0. And also that, well, for all numbers n, if it holds for n, then it also holds for successor n. So this is the usual induction principle for natural numbers. And finally, the fourth set of rules, which is the most important ones for this talk, are the computation rules. And those say how this induction principle can be simplified when we apply it to a concrete number or to a concrete application of one of the constructors. So in particular, if we apply it to the 0 case, well, we get the base step, right? So we get this second argument. If we apply it to the successor, we get an application of this inductive step of the PS, which is the third argument. And these computation rules are important because they are applied automatically by the type checker of proof assistant or dependently typed language. So these are something that happens automatically. We don't have to worry about that ourselves as the user of the system. However, so typically if you work in a proof assistant, so Coq or Agda, you're not doing this directly. Right? You're not giving these 4 sets of rules directly. And the reason for that is, well, that would be very unsafe. So it's very easy to abuse this format and define something that renders the whole system unsound. And instead, there's a more restricted set of common patterns that you can use to define new types and new functions of these types. So in particular, we can define inductive types that are strictly positive. We can define functions that are complete, so that cover all the possible cases. And we can define recursive fixed points as long as they are structurally recursive, so they are terminating. And that's all good and well. You can do a lot of things with that, but it's not always enough. So there is this kind of limits the ways in which we can extend a type theory. And to understand why or what's the problem exactly, I have to talk a bit more about the 2 different notions of equality that we have in dependent type theory. So that's often a point of confusion to newcomers, but we have 2 notions of equality, which are definitional equality and propositional equality. So let me start with definitional equality, which we just tried with the equals sign here. And what does that mean? That really means that X and Y are definitionally equal if they have the same normal form. So they compute to the syntactically the same expression. So for example, the lambda abstraction lambda x to x applied to the number 4 is definitionally equal to 4 because they both evaluate to the normal form 4. However, counterexample here is, well, x plus y is not definitionally equal to y plus x because, well, they don't evaluate any further. They don't. They're stuck and they have a different form. An important thing about definitional equality that this is fixed by language. So typically, this is not something we can easily extend. Right? So, it's really built into the system, so a user cannot extend it. However, it's checked completely automatically. So so you also don't have to worry about if something is definitional equality, it will happen automatically. And so in particular, 2 types will be considered equal by the type checker if they are definitionally equal. So you don't have to do anything else. Then on the other side of the picture, we have propositional equality, which, we say that 2 terms x and y are propositionally equal if there is a proof P. So if you have a proof that those 2 are equal, and we write that with the triple equal sign here, and the A here, that's just the type annotation. So that's saying x and y should both be of type A. And of course, we can prove also that these 2 expressions, so lambda x to x applied to 4 is equal to 4. That's even very easy. There's this proof called REFL, short for reflexivity. we can also prove that x plus y is equal to y plus x. So this is really a more powerful notion of equality. And in particular, this is an extensible notion of equality in the sense that, well, we can prove new equalities or we can postulate new axioms about this equality. And the user can work with this as they want. However, if we have a propositional equality that cannot be applied automatically by the system, so the user has to apply it manually, and that can take quite a lot of work. Okay. Hope that's clear. So let me give two examples now of what the problem is when we try to work in a dependent type tree and we have to fit to these restrictions that I showed. Right. So here the first example is, well, we defined the plus function here by recursion on the first argument. And now we want to prove this commutativity property that I mentioned, right? We want to prove it by induction. So we have a case, the base case when the first number is 0, and we have a case where it's successor. However, we already run into a problem in the base case. So there we want to prove that 0 plus y is equal to y plus 0. And if we try to prove that with reflexivity, that's actually not accepted by Agda because, well, it says that y is not equal to y plus 0. So what's wrong here? Well, Agda computed this one, so 0 plus y, computed that to be equal to y, but the y plus 0, that's a stuck term, so that didn't evaluate any further. Yeah, so yeah, and so that's basically, this is only a propositional equality, but we would really like it to be a definitional equality. However, there is no way to make it into one. Then the second problem is, well, sometimes you also want to define not just new functions, but new types. And they don't always fit into this general principle in inductive, strictly positive types. And one very common example of that is, well, extending type tree with quotient types is known to be very challenging. So here I've given a very reduced example, so of natural numbers modulo 2. Right, so we want to define that as a quotient type. So we first postulate this type, so that's the formation rule. Then we postulate the introduction rule. So you'd say, well, for each natural number, we also have a number in n modulo 2. However, that means, well, now we have too many elements, basically, right? So they're not all different. So we have to say when two of these projections are equal. And that's exactly, well, so when two numbers, x and y, are equal modulo 2, then their projections are considered equal. So that's this quotient rule. And that doesn't really fit in the format of this inductive data type. So that's why I'm postulating this instead of defining it directly. And then finally, we also want a recursion principle, which would allow us to define functions out of this quotient type. So in particular, so what does this recursion principle say? Well, it says if you want to construct a function from n over 2 to some other type, a, then it's enough to give a function f from n to a, but it has to satisfy a certain property. Namely that, well, if x and y are equal modulo 2, then f of x and f of y should also be equal. So this is to ensure that f behaves correctly or on this quotient type. So yeah, so this is something we can postulate in Agda, for example. However, there's a problem with this approach, namely that now we can construct this term recursor applied to some projection of x, and we should have, or would like that this evaluates to f of x, but it does not. There's nothing telling Agda to evaluate this. So this is just a stuck term, and which means we can postulate that they're equal, but that it will still not compute automatically. Okay. Yeah. So what can we do? Well, so we have these two problems, right? So we want to kind of add new equalities to existing definitions. We want to construct new types that compute in a certain way. So what can we do to fix that problem? Yeah. So one possible solution that's often mentioned is, well, adding this particular rule called the equality reflection rule, which says that, well, whenever we have a proof that two things are propositionally equal, well, then they're also definitionally equal. And that basically merges these two notions of equality into one notion, which now becomes a lot more powerful. And that's kind of, it solves the problems that I discussed, but at a very high price. Namely, well, this rule, well, it can be applied at any point, and it basically adding it makes type checking completely undecidable. And even worse, in practice, it's kind of not really feasible to implement or a good type checker that makes use of this rule. So that really puts us in a hard dilemma. We have to choose, well, do we want equality to be decidable, but not have this equality reflection rule, or do you want it to be extensible, but then lose the decidability? And the answer I have to this question is yes. Yes, I want it to be decidable. I also want it to be extensible. So I don't want to have to choose between the two. And yeah, so that's where the rewrite rules come in. So basically, we want to extend our type tree with rewrite rules to make this definitional equality extensible, but still hopefully keep it decidable. And I've put a footnote here. So if we choose the rewrite rules carefully, I'll go into more detail on that later. Right. But first, so well, what can we do with rewrite rules? Well, for example, we could add rewrite rules to existing definitions. So we could make plus also compute in a way that computes on the second argument, not just on the first one. Or we could add rewrite rules to some postulates. So for example, we could add this equality as a rewrite rule and make it compute automatically. And I quickly want to show also how this actually works in Agda. So a while ago, started implementing this extension of Agda with rewrite rules. Right. So yeah, here I have a small example. So it's the same example as before. So this proof of commutativity. And so if I try to prove this, then indeed Agda gives this error that y is not equal to y plus 0. Right. Right. So these green parts, those are parts of the proof that are not yet complete. And I'm trying to fill in one of those parts, but I get a type error. Okay. So what can we do with rewrite rules? Well, I can go here. So what we do here? So first of all, well, I've proven these two equalities that I want as propositional equalities. Right? So I've proven that x plus 0 equals x, and that x plus successor y is equal to successor of x plus y. And then, well, this is where the magic happens. So now we can have register these propositional equalities as rewrite rules, and then basically turns them from propositional equalities into definitional equalities, right? And that's basically what this pragma does. And now suddenly, well, let's try again this proof. And now the REFL is actually accepted. So now I didn't have to mention this proof explicitly, well, just applied automatically by Agda. And similarly, in the second case, there was a similar problem, but also that one is solved now as well, thanks to this second rewrite. Right. Okay, and I have the similar example for the quotient type, but I see I'm already taking quite a lot of time, so maybe I'll skip this for now and maybe come back to it later. Yes. Okay. Because there's quite a lot of things I want to talk about still. Okay, so yeah, to summarize this first part, so what is this type theory with rewrite rules? Well, in the general case, we kind of have a rewrite rule that looks like this. So we have a function symbol f, which is applied to some patterns, right? And then we want to rewrite anything that is an instance of this pattern to some term t. And to be fully explicit, I also added the pattern variables here on the left, which makes things sometimes a bit easier. Right. And then there's a few restrictions on what kind of rewrite rules we allow. So yeah, first of all, these pattern variables must be left linear. So it means each of these variables can only occur once in the patterns on the left. Second one, well, this symbol f must be some fresh symbol. So we cannot import some function from a library and then extend it with further rewrite rules. It has to be, we have to add the rewrite rules immediately when we define the symbol. This is a bit of a technical limitation, so there's ways to work around it, but it makes things easier. And the third one is, for now, we're not allowing higher order rules. So actually the higher order rules are implemented in Agda, but they're not yet part of the formalization. So I'm skipping them for now. Yeah, and then rewriting type theory formally is basically Martin-Löf's type theory extended with these arbitrary user-defined rewrite rules, which match these three criteria. Okay. Yes. So this now we had a problem. So this non-extensibility of definitional equality. And we solved it by extending our type theory with rewrite rules. So you could ask now, well, is everything okay? Is we fixed the problem and now everything is good? Yeah, so next I want to look into a bit to the meta theory of type theory extended with rewrite rules, and we'll see that this is not actually the case. Okay, so yeah. Let me start by recapping maybe the meta theory of Martin-Löf type theory in general. So Martin-Löf type theory satisfies quite a lot of good properties that make it very well suited as the basis for a proof assistant. And in particular, there's three properties that I'm going to be talking about today, which are, first of all, logical consistency. That means, well, there should not be any term u which inhabits the empty type, so the bottom type. This is important because otherwise we could prove anything in our system. The second property is decidable type checking. So that means when we are given some context gamma, some term u and some type a, we can decide whether u has type a in this context gamma. So this makes it, well, it is important because otherwise we cannot implement a type checker for a language. And then finally, third property that's very basic, but also very important is a subject reduction, which says, well, if we have some term of u of type A and we can evaluate it, some other type term v, then v should also still have type A. So it's also known as a type preservation. And the question is, well, for each of these three properties, do they still hold in a type theory with rewrite rules? So let's look at each of them separately. So first of all, yeah, let's consider a rewrite rule rewriting 0 to 1. Doesn't that break consistency? And yeah, the answer is yes, it does break consistency, but it's not really different from postulating that 0 is equal to 1. Which would also break consistency. And in particular, we can regain soundness by requiring that each rewrite rule first must be proven. Right? So that's what you saw, what I did in the Agda as well. Right? I first had to prove that these rules were sound, and only then could I use them as rewrite rules. And with this requirement, we regain consistency as a theorem of our system. So for each rewrite rule we have a proof, then the system is logically consistent. Okay. So far so good. So let's look at the second property, which is the decidable type checking. And yeah, so first of all, well, there's quite a few things that can go wrong here. So let's look at one example. So if we have a loop, some term loop that's just a rewrite rule that rewrites loop to itself, well, that means that evaluation will loop, obviously. And in particular, that will make the type checker loop as well. And hence we lose decidable type checking. So that's a problem definitely. We can look at a slightly weaker property, namely that, well, if the type checker terminates, can we at least say that it is correct? And that still holds at least. So that's, I call it soundness of type checking, says that, well, if the type checker terminates with the usual algorithm for type checking, then the result is actually correct. So at least we still have that, which is a weaker property, but means the system is still kind of usable. Yeah, and then another question is, well, what about completeness? So, and there we can again look at a counterexample there. Well, suppose we have a symbol X with two rewrite rules attached to it. So that says, well, it rewrites both to the natural number type and to the Boolean type. Yeah, so this is non-confluent, you'll notice probably. So the question is then, will type checking accept some Boolean to be of type X? And the answer is no. Well, it depends on the order on which the rewrite rules are applied. So if this one is applied first, then you will get a type error that natural numbers are not equal to Booleans. Right. So to get always also correct errors from our type checking algorithm, it's important that we need confluence of the reduction. Right. So this is the first time maybe that the confluence pops up. Yeah. So and then we get this theorem that if some term is type correct, then and the set of rules is confluent, then type checking will not throw an error. And so together, these soundness and completeness of type checking, call it practical type checking, which is basically saying, well, if the algorithm terminates, then it is correct. And so in particular, rewriting type theory with confluent reduction rules has practical type checking. However, the type theory with equality reflection does not have any practical type checking algorithm in this sense. And I want to emphasize, well, the only thing that really can go wrong in a system with practical type checking is that, well, that the type checker loops because of some rewrite rules that the user gave, which are non-terminating. Right? So in particular, it kind of decouples the problem of type checking from the problem of termination checking, which is a separate problem that's important, but I'm not talking about that today. Third property I wanted to talk about is subject reduction. And again, there you can easily come up with a counterexample. So suppose we rewrite the Boolean true to the number 42. Doesn't that break type preservation? And obviously it does. So, but maybe we can just restrict ourselves to homogeneous rewrite rules where, well, the left and the right both have the same type. And then you would say, well, we get, if we do that, we would get a theorem that says, well, if all the rewrite rules are homogeneous, then types are preserved during reduction. Except, unfortunately, it's not the case. So this theorem does not is not a theorem; it's false. So we need a couple of more properties in order to prove subject reduction. So yeah, let's look at another slightly more involved counterexample. So here we have a rewrite rule that says, well, that works on types. So in particular, we're rewriting the type, the function type from natural numbers to natural numbers to this type from natural numbers to Booleans. And that means, well, basically, so that, well, we can take this identity function, which has type not to not, and we can now say, well, it also has type not to bool, because those two types are equal according to this rewrite rule, right? And then we can take this identity function, a type not to bool, and apply it to a number 0, and we get a Boolean according to the type system. And then, of course, if we use this, well, this Boolean as the condition of an if then else, well, it will be evaluated to 0, which is the result. And this if then else gets 0, and the whole system crashes, or you get internal errors in Agda. Everything breaks down. Right. So this is a problem. We don't really want to allow rewrite rules like this. There's a very similar problem if we have a symbol X, which rewrites to both not arrow not and not arrow bool. We have basically the same problem as I showed here, right? So this program is still accepted. So we would also like to avoid or prevent having this set of rules. And here you can note, well, this is again a non-confluent set of rewrite rules. So this is the second time that Confluence turns out to be a key property to making our system really work. Okay, yes. So yeah, in summary, to prove subject reduction, we need 3 properties. So first of all the rules need to be homogeneous. So rewrite rules cannot rewrite type constructors, such as the function arrow. And thirdly, we need that rewrite rules are confluent. So again, yeah, we need this confluence, like I said. Okay, and so I talked about these 3 properties. So I'm gonna do an attempt of making a picture which puts all of those together. So I hope this will make the picture clearer. So I put them here in kind of random positions. So let's first look at what we normally do in Martin-Löf type theory, and then I'll add the rewrite rules later. So usually, well, logical consistency, we can prove that from certain syntactic properties, such as well-foundedness of fixed points and strictly positivity. We can prove decidable type checking, which follows from this effective type checking on the one hand and strong normalization on the other hand, or termination. And we can prove subject reduction by using a lemma, the important lemma of the Metatheory, which is called injectivity of pi types. And then, so I put some more things on here. So this is not the most important, but so we can prove strong normalization in turn by requiring some other properties. So again, we need fixed points to be well-founded. We need data types to be strictly positive. We also need consistency of these universes. So otherwise, there's this paradox called Girard's paradox, which breaks termination again. And so to make sure that universes are consistent, well, we need to first make sure that our program is type correct. So we already need to type check it. But luckily, that's possible because we have this effective type check. Okay. So now let's take a look at what is added to this picture when we add rewrite rules. Well, first of all, for logical consistency, we require that all the rewrite rules are provable. So let's add that. So for effective type checking, we also needed an extra property, namely we needed global confluence of reduction. So let's also add that as a condition. And then finally, for subject reduction, well, we required 3 properties, right? We required global confluence again. We required no rewrite rules of type constructors, and we required that rewrite rules are type preserved or homogeneous. Okay. So this is the picture, and so each arrow here is basically a lemma or a proof that we can give. And now the question becomes, well, how do we check global confluence, or how do we ensure global confluence of our system? Right? 2 years ago, not knowing anything about confluence as I did, I decided, well, it's easy to check global confluence. We just check local confluence and using some Knut Bendix or some variant of that. And then we just make sure that the reduction is terminating. And then together, those 2 properties imply global confluence, and everything will work. So we tried to do this approach for a while until we realized that actually this is not going to work. And maybe you spot the problem already in this picture.
There is a cycle, no?
Yeah, exactly. There is a cycle in this proof. So even if we can prove all the blue arrows, this is not a valid proof because there's a cycle going here. So we need subject reduction in order to do the termination checking. but we need to check termination to prove global confluence, and then we need global confluence to prove subject reduction. So yeah, so we realized that this doesn't work. And in the end, so we considered a few alternative approaches. So one, maybe we can check termination separately without requiring the typing, so just doing untyped termination checking. This turns out to be really difficult, especially when you have, non-trivial set of universes. So this universe consistency is really very important for ensuring termination of dependent type theory. And without it, this becomes almost impossible. So in the end, what we decided instead, well, let's give up on normalization for now. Let's give up on decidable type checking. We'll be happy with effective type checking. And in order to get that, well, the only thing that we have to do is we just have to check global confluence directly instead of first going through local confluence and termination. Right. And so, yeah, this is the picture we ended up with. Okay. So then that brings us to the third part of this talk. So now we had type theory extended with rewrite rules. That's great. But it causes a lot of problems in the meta theory. And yeah, we can make some compromises, add some extra checks, but in the end, we really need to ensure global confluence, as it's a crucial property both for ensuring subject reduction and for ensuring practical type checking. So yeah, that's I'm getting to the confluence checking part. So let's see. So what we really need is a good confluence checker. And we had quite a big set of requirements here. So we want to have a confluence check that, well, first of all, it can not just work on a simply typed or a pure rewrite system, but it also has to deal with all the primitive reduction rules of Martin-Löf type theory. So we have beta reduction, we have these reductions for the data types that are built in. We might have some other reduction rules, right? So it has to be powerful enough to deal with all these features, and these are always kind of everywhere present, right? So the fact that they are present as everywhere means that the usual orthogonality approach doesn't really work. So second one, well, obviously we want it to be general enough to accept the examples you want to support. So in particular, just requiring orthogonality is again not something we can do because we wanted to support this, for example, this plus example, right, where you reduce on both sides of the plus. Third of all, well, we, as I established, we want to check global confluence and want to do so without first assuming termination of the system. It has to work with a potentially non-terminating set of rewrite rules. And finally, we really want this check to be modular. And that's just because of practical reasons. We were typically working with a big project in a proof assistant that consists of many different files. We want to be able to check those independently and import them without having to recheck the combination of different imports. Well, we have obviously looked at the literature, but we didn't really find anything that we could just take off the shelf and that solved all these problems at once. If there is something, I'm of course very glad to hear it. But so instead of using any off-the-shelf solution, well, we decided to design our own confluence criterion. And in particular, we started by taking some inspiration from the old masters. There's this very old and traditional or classic proof of confluence of untyped lambda calculus by Tait-Martin-Löf that relies on the parallel reduction. We decided to look at that because, well, it's for untyped lambda calculus, which is non-terminating. So we want to take a look at that. That could be interesting. So first of all, what's this parallel reduction? I'm sure you know, but just give quick examples. So parallel reduction allows you to reduce all the immediately visible redexes by one step. So in this example, well, we have two redexes. So we have a successor plus something else that we can reduce. And we also have this lambda abstraction with some arguments that we can also reduce. So we can reduce both of them in one parallel step and get to this result. Now there's a new redex here, so the 0 plus b, but that one wasn't visible yet. So here we still had x plus b. So we cannot also reduce that. For that one, we would have to take another step. And then the foundation of this proof relies on this triangle property, which says that for each term t, there is some optimal reduct called rho of t. So in particular, well, we have first of all t reduces in one parallel step to rho of t, and then for all other parallel reducts, well, they also reduce in one parallel step to rho of t. And so if we have this triangle property of parallel reduction, then we can easily prove global confluence by taking two of these triangles and gluing them together. So whenever we have t reduced to u and u prime, well, we know that u and u prime both reduce to rho of t. Yeah, so this is global confluence of parallel reduction, but there's an easy argument that also shows that it then also single step reduction is globally confluent. And then, yeah, so yeah, for this untyped lambda calculus, this triangle property was just a property that always holds. Now, obviously, it doesn't always hold for an arbitrary set of rewrite rules, but at least it's something that can be checked and moreover, it can be checked in a modular way. So if we can just run this check for the rewrite rules given by the user, then we can ensure global confluence in that way. Okay. And yeah, so let me give you the actual check that I implemented, or the high level view of it at least. So yeah, I don't have enough time to explain why this algorithm exactly works, but I spent quite a bit of time, I mean, finding the right steps here, but at least, yeah, so this works. So first step of the algorithm is, well, just take all the rewrite rules, order them in some way. So it usually helps to put some more specific rules before the more general ones. We pick some order. Then the second step is check that the left-hand sides of the rewrite rules are closed under unification. So that means that, well, whenever we have two rewrite rules that overlap, so there is some most general unifier of their left-hand sides, then there should be another rewrite rule that has this most general unifier as the left-hand side. Right? So we should always have a more specialized version that determines, basically that says what to do when there's two rewrite rules that apply. And then the third step where we actually check global confluence is, well, for each rewrite rule L to R, we just have to enumerate all the possible parallel reductions of this left-hand side and check that each of them reduce in one further parallel step to the right-hand side. So if this is satisfied, then we can prove that the triangle property is satisfied, and hence we have global confluence. Yeah, and then one more remark, well, it's possible that this step, the second step here, that fails because there's there's not a rule with this most general unifier. So for example, it actually happens in this plus example that I showed. And so there we need to add some extra auxiliary rules. So for example, we need to add this extra rule that says, well, when we have successor on both sides, then we can take out both of them. So this could be added automatically. At the moment, you still have to do it manually in Agda. So yeah, okay, let me show again how it works in Agda quickly. So yeah, so before I was running the Agda with rewrite rules, but without the confluence check enabled. But I can enable it by going to the top of this file and uncommenting this option, so the confluence check. And then if I reload the file, well, we're getting some errors. So let me see, where am I? Yes, so here we're getting those two rewrite rules are highlighted, and we're getting some more information in the buffer below. It says that the global Confluence check failed. In particular, this successor is x plus 0 can be rewritten to either successor x or successor of x plus 0. And that basically means we have to add some extra rewrite rules with some of these left-hand sides. So I've done that at the bottom of the file. So it turns out we need to add 3 extra rules here to resolve the ambiguities. So one for successor x plus 0, one for 0 plus successor x, and one for adding 2 successors. And yeah, if we do that and add all of those rewrite rules, then the Confluence check is happy again. So now basically we can be confident when the Confluence checker accepts this, that really, well, first of all, the rewrite rules are indeed confluent. So type checking will not throw these spurious error messages. And moreover, we can be confident that subject reduction is preserved so that we will not get weird internal errors when using this feature in Agda. Oof. So everything is working again. Let me go back to my slides just for the conclusion. So yeah, so first of all, well, you can ask, well, can we do better? So this triangle property is certainly not the most general criterion we can come up with. It's in fact, I mean, if you compare it to more recent work, I'm sure this is very simplistic. However, this simplicity also has some advantages. So first of all, well, we were able, because of this simplicity, we were able to prove formally that it's correct and that we indeed have subject reduction for our theory. It's not too hard to implement. So the most tricky part was this computing the most general unifiers and defining the parallel reduction, but nothing too difficult. It's also, well, I would say it's quite predictable to the user, or at least when it fails, it's usually clear how to fix it. So the error messages actually give concrete suggestion, well, maybe try to add a rewrite rule with this left-hand side. And usually that is enough to know what to do. But still, it's an open question if we can do better and have a more powerful Confluence criterion that still has these properties. Yeah. Oh yeah, at this point, I also have kind of a request for people working on Confluence. So what would really have helped me 2 years ago, I think, well, we spent a lot of time being lost in the literature. So there's a lot of very interesting and cool Confluence criteria. And it was not at all clear to us, like, which of those could be applied to our setting or which of ones, what were the limitations. So for us, it would have been really useful to have some kind of database or collection of these Confluence criteria that are really, so first of all, I wanted to know which ones are the best for a specific application, what requirements or what things do they support? So first order or higher order rules, terminating or non-terminating rules, is it modular or not? So those were all questions that I had. And then something that would have been very useful would be to have some kind of demo implementation, right? That I could easily use for my implementation. And then as a bonus, well, maybe it's not always easy, I know, but formally verifying the correctness of these criteria would be something that is very good to do as well. So to conclude this whole story, so we had this big tension between propositional and definitional equality in modern proof assistance. And that really is a big barrier to entry, but for newcomers, so you get these weird type errors like x plus 0 is not equals to x, why is that? And also for experts who want to extend the system with new things like quotient types, again, that's something that's currently very hard to do. And yeah, we kind of solve both of these problems, by making type theory extensible or definitional equality extensible with user-definable rewrite rules. So that improves computational behavior of existing definitions and allows to define new primitives that compute in the ways that we want. And we saw this cause a lot of problems in the meta theory, but thanks to the check of this triangle property, we can ensure that they preserve type safety and practical type checking also in a modular and decidable way. And all of this has been formalized in MetaCoq and also implemented in Agda. So I'll leave you with this slide with some links that you can check out to see further, and I would be very happy to take your questions.
Thank you very much for this very nice talk. Yes, please. Yeah, we don't clap, but we can virtually clap or something like this. So we are clapping with the heart. So I see that already William Demeo has a question, so he has raised hand. Please raise your hands. I guess it's simpler this way.
Yes, thank you, Jesper, for a very nice talk. That was really informative, and I wanted to know, is the rewrite pragma available to use in the standard Agda, or do you need a special build?
Yes, so the rewrite pragma has been in Agda for a few years now. So in the latest release, 262, there's also this Confluence check that I just talked about has been released. So it's not enabled by default. You need to enable rewriting first with the rewriting flag, and then enable the Confluence check with the Confluence check flag. But it's all available in the standard Agda. Yes. Okay,
great. I just had one more quick question, if it's okay. But other people have questions, so I can ask after them, I guess.
Well, go ahead, since you have the.
Okay, so just when you had this loop diagram when you're doing local Confluence, and then so you wanted to remove this loop, and then you were discussing universe consistency, and then you had to give up on decidable type checking or termination at least. I was wondering, does the fact that you're working like with a non-cumulative universe hierarchy or a cumulative one, does this affect? Did you have to worry about that when you're talking about universe consistency?
A good question. So, well, as far as I know, so that there are some gaps between the formalization. So, for example, here, so the extension of Metacoq has cumulativity. Agda doesn't have it by default. I'm not sure if it has a big impact on this proof.
Yeah. Okay.
So I think the proof might become a bit more involved with cumulativity, but I think the general picture is still the same. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you again for a great talk.
Thank you. So I think Vincent has a question. I think he was first. I don't know which order the question was asked.
You hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Yes, thanks for the talk. I enjoyed, of course, that Confluence things are being used now without assuming termination, without just a local Confluence Newman. So a few questions, remarks. So I don't recall that Tait-Martin-Löf ever did a triangle property. As far as I know, they didn't. They proved diamond property. So do you have a reference for that?
Yes, so we got this from the book by, well, okay, so we didn't have a direct reference for this, but it's attributed to Tait-Martin-Löf by the book by Barendrecht from
No, he doesn't.
It doesn't? Okay,
he doesn't,
then
no. that I'm sure of. No, I mean, the whole literature attributes the inductive proof using triangle to Takahashi, which is much later. In fact, using the property, as I explained in my talk at the FSCD, goes back to Gross.
Okay, then I apologize for that. So again,
well, no, it just I wanted to know.
Thanks for that. Yeah.
Where this comes from, and indeed, okay. So then I have in the chat, I now type a question, an example of two rules, and I wondered whether it falls under your criterion. So it's the successor predecessor rules. I hope you can see them.
Oh yes, I've looked at this example.
And
so at the moment, no. So first of all, it's
set, or?
Yes. So you need to add then a rule for successor, predecessor, successor, and etc. etc. So
right,
no, it doesn't fall under the current criteria.
And then I think your criterion is a special case of Okui's lemma or the theorem.
Okay.
So I think you can do something more general there than what you have without fixing the order, etc. And then it's still okay also in the high order case. So you have this.
Yes. Yeah, so again, like I said, so in the Agda implementation, it's also implemented for higher order rules, but we don't have a formal.
No, but I mean that Okui criterion requires less than your unification existence of unifiers.
I see. Okay, right.
And vice versa, if you have unifiers, then Okui's lemma or theorem holds, I think. But okay, right. Maybe we can discuss this later.
Yeah, thanks. So yeah, okay. This is also a balance. So I needed something that was also practically implementable. So or was feasible to implement using the existing machinery in Agda.
Yeah.
So okay. that's another reason maybe why this is not.
Did you look at the tools? Did you look at the Confluence competition tools, etc.? Because you said I wanted to.
Yeah, I did look at those. It was difficult to use them directly, I think, because of this. The first requirement that we have here, right? So we have to deal with. It's not just a pure rewrite system that we have. We have this existing framework of Martin-Löf type theory, which also has quite a lot of reduction rules.
Yeah, right. Okay.
We have to make sure that, well, not just the rewrite rules are confluent, but we have to make sure that the whole reduction is really confluent.
And that will be difficult. Yes, I understand. Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we are a bit over time, but anyway, since we are online, people can just pretend they are there and go have a coffee anyway. So I propose that we take the two questions we have there. So Camilo, did you have a question?
Thank you, Samuel, and thank you for the talk, Jesper. I have a question about the algorithm you presented for checking this triangle property. And in particular, I would like to ask you about the second step. How restrictive is that in practice, and how do you apply it? If the condition is not met, do you try to complete the set of rules, adding new rules? How does it work in practice?
Yeah, so we could do that. It's currently not doing any completion yet. So you have to, basically you will get an error message, and then you have to add an extra rule. So it will mention the left-hand side for the rewrite rule, but it will not add a rule automatically.
But you can do that as a methodology, even if the algorithm doesn't do it automatically. That's the way you proceed? Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. Thank you, Jesper.
And
so that's what I did for the example that I showed you. With the plus, right? So you add the rewrite rules that you want, and then it will give some warnings or errors that it's not confluent, or it might not be confluent, and then you need to add some extra auxiliary rules, which are basically instances of the existing rules. So you're not really adding new equalities with that, but just making the confluence checking a bit easier.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah.
Herman Gavers, do you have a question?
I unmute. Okay. Jesper, thanks for your very nice talk. So your global confluence, that checks confluence on the pseudo terms, right? On the terms, on the abstract syntax of the terms. There's no type information at all involved there, right?
Good question. So yes, in the thing that I presented here, yes. So in the Agda implementation, there is a bit of type information involved. that's mainly to deal with eta equality, which also I didn't have time to talk about here. But yeah.
Yeah, I was wondering about eta equality because that's
Yes.
not confluent on the pseudo term level, but it is only confluent on the type level. But you have to take types into account. So I was wondering whether you deal with that.
Yes. So yeah, again in the implementation in Agda, I go a bit beyond what I presented here. So there, eta equality is also supported, and basically, yeah, we consider terms, type terms up to eta equality, right? So the for the confluence check. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. So is there any last question? If not,
I see there's
propose...
one question in the chat also.
Yeah.
Yes, maybe I can speak, Jesper.
Yes, monsieur.
Nice for the nice talk. I enjoyed your presentation, but I don't know whether this item 2 in the algorithm is incomplete. But what I think you are doing is you are promoting a manual completion, node-based completion algorithm.
Mm-hmm.
You are checking peaks.
Well, it's not really not bandix, right?
You are fixing the well, it's not really not bandix because you are only checking peaks in the root position of the left-hand side of the rules. But okay, you solve the problem including a new rule, and then you will have another problem, and then you come back and you will solve another problem. This is an infinite process. I think the example that suggested Vincent will give rise to some infinite fixing procedure.
Yes, yes.
Okay. Maybe I am not understanding well this item 2, but as it's written, you only check root positions overlappings.
No, yes, right. So, right. So what I'm writing here is indeed, so if you want to have rules that, or if you want to have symbols that are both head symbols of rewrite rules and also can be matched against, right, then you need a bit more general criterion. So you need to also check, so when we have a left-hand side that overlaps with a subterm of another left-hand side, right? And then that also if that has a much unified, it also needs to be rewrite rule.
Okay.
Okay. But yeah, so what you mentioned, so yes, no, you're understanding correctly, right? So this is a very restrictive algorithm, right? So I'm not. I mean, I would really like to have something more general, but this was not our primary priority, right? So our primary priority was to get something like get anything at all that works and that we can do the meta theory of and prove the correctness of and implement. And then after that, so indeed now we can consider extending this, and making it more powerful. But yeah, so and then so I mean partially in Agda, but definitely. So Theo and Nicola, they were my collaborators. They were interested in getting some form of rewrite rules into Coq. I mean, so you can maybe understand that a lot of the other Coq developers are very skeptical against this, and they really want very strong formal guarantees that this doesn't break the type system of Coq in any way, right? So this is why our priorities are like this and not like the power of the criterion is a secondary concern for us. Yeah.
All right, thank you very much. Also for the nice talk. Okay.
Okay, so thank you very much again, Jesper, for this very nice talk. Yeah, it was very nice. I propose that so I will make breakout rooms, and so this main chat is open, and I will make the breakout rooms, and you can go into those rooms if you want to discuss in smaller groups during the break.